and Prigozhin, all of a sudden is, in the limelight. He officially is, the founder of Wagner. He's in Putin's good graces, and he starts promising ever bigger things. He eventually promises Bakhmut, that he's going to take Bakhmut. And the MOD too is looking to get as many guys as they can now for the front. And so they start leaning on Wagner as this kind of brand of, cool guys in the Russian context of, to bring in men to recruit. And so the billboards are going up across Russia, join PMC Wagner. So he's recruiting new volunteers, and then he gets access to Russia's prison population.
The Project K.
Project K.
The average person today is feeling the financial strain more than ever. Expenses are up, wages aren't keeping pace, and many people are finding it nearly impossible to make ends meet. With little left over for covering the basics, it's no surprise that many are resorting to credit cards just to get by, often carrying high balances and interest rates in the 20s and even 30s. If you're a homeowner and you're stuck in this cycle of mounting debt, you need to call my friends at American Financing. Their salary-based mortgage consultants are saving homeowners an average of $800 a month, helping you put your hard-earned money back where it belongs. Plus, if you act now, you might even be able to skip your next mortgage payment. There are no upfront fees, so it costs you nothing to find out how much you could save each month. It's time to break free of the stress of debt. Call American Financing today and take control of your financial future. 866-889-8010, 866-889-8010, AmericanFinancing.net/teamhouse.
If you sleep hot at night, you know just how disruptive it can be. Whether you're having trouble falling asleep, you're waking up sweating in the middle of the night, or all of the above. That's where GhostBed can help. As the makers of the coolest beds in the world, GhostBed is your go-to for cooling mattresses, cooling pillows, and even cooling bedding. From their signature Ghost Ice fabric to patented technology that adjusts with your body temperature, every GhostBed mattress is designed with cooling in mind. So whether you want a plusher mattress that cushions your shoulders and hips, or a firmer option with exceptional support, your GhostBed will keep you cool and comfortable all night long. When you purchase a GhostBed mattress, your comfort is guaranteed. You can try out your mattress for a 101 nights risk-free and make sure it's the right fit for you. Plus, they offer free shipping and most items ship within 24 hours. If you're not sure which GhostBed is for you, check out their mattress quiz. You'll answer a few questions and get your personalized recommendation, or reach out to their friendly team of sleep experts for all the help you need. Even better, Team House listeners can get 50% off site-wide for a limited time. Just visit ghostbed.com/house and use code HOUSE at checkout. Again, that's ghostbed.com/house with code HOUSE at checkout to save a whopping 50% off site-wide. And if you're not in the market for a mattress, check out their pillows, their bedding. They have all kinds of great stuff there. So thanks to GhostBed, and check them out.
Special operations, covert ops, espionage. The Team House with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hi, everyone. This is episode 331 of the Team House. I'm Jack Murphy, here today with journalist and author John Lechner. He's the author of Death is Our Business, which came out just yesterday. It is the most comprehensive biography of the Wagner Group, a Russian private military company. I just finished reading this book this week. It's pretty incredible. There's a lot of stuff for us to go through in here. With some very colorful characters.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
John, thanks for coming on the show. And before we jump into the book, I mean, let's hear a little bit about yourself. Like, you have a pretty extensive background, working in journalism, and also you speak like 8 languages, which really explains why you were able to write this book. But tell us a little bit about like who you are and what led you into the book project.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I was telling you, I love for whatever reason, my primary interest in life is languages, linguistics, and like learning new language. I just love it. And I don't know why. It's been since I was a little kid.
And according to this handy little sheet that your publisher
from the good people at
sent me,
Bloomsbury, yeah.
you speak Russian, French, Sango, Turkish, Georgian, Bosnian-Croat, Serbo-Croat, German, and Chechen.
Yeah. And working on right now Arabic, ancient Greek, Portuguese, and I should be going in April to the Amazon to hang out with an indigenous community to try to learn their language.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to write a piece about it. So I just I love this.
So yeah, you're like a linguistic cartographer or something.
Yeah, that's
you
what
really,
that's what
you really
yeah,
love that stuff.
That's what I really enjoy. And I mean, like along with that, like if you're into that, you kind of have a predisposition to being interested in different cultures and history. And so I, how I, came upon this, I had lived in Russia for a little while. I spoke Russian and then went to college and was a Russian studies guy. And then, like a lot of people who have like super niche interests, I went into investment banking and worked on Wall Street for like 7 years and slowly kind of allowed my soul to be crushed. And then finally, kind of, I made the decision I got to do something that is like closer to what I'm passionate about. So I moved down to DC, and I had been spending some more time in Africa. And so when Wagner first touched down in the Central African Republic in 2018, and I remember reading about it, and I mean there were kind of like two things. Like one was I thought it would be fascinating to find out, that this was a confluence of my interests, Russia and Africa. This I wanted to know how these people were interacting and adapting to each other, or not adapting to each other. And also, I just like wanted to be the person who writes about it. I didn't want other people to write about it.
So, I mean, did you have a job going over there, or did you really just hit the ground and just start filing like wire reports? I mean,
yeah. I mean, like, I don't know if
pitches.
you, like, I don't know exactly how, like, yeah, basically that. Like, there's a weird thing about, like, when you get in, I mean, I got into journalism and I still, like, don't feel like super, like, I still feel a lot of kind of imposter syndrome calling myself a journalist. Because there is this interesting thing about journalism that you can't do in investment banking. You can't just show up in New York and say you're an investment banker and like manifest it that way. Like you have to, but like with journalism, you can kind of show up in a place and say and kind of declare yourself a journalist and try to figure things out and write articles and pitch them. And over time it takes a lot of effort to get those pitches accepted, and then it takes a lot of effort to move up but you can basically kind of manifest it yourself.
As far as like the networking part on the ground in some of these countries is very interesting. You got me thinking about it. Everything over in a lot of these places is based on personal relationships.
Yes.
So like if you know the right people, if you have the right like interlocutors and they like you, you can get wild interviews. Like you can get introduced to people that like it just would not happen in the United States, for instance. Like you can be a journalist and come fly to America and I want to interview the Delta Force commander. That will never, ever happen. But you can fly into the Philippines or Kurdistan, and if you know the right people, you can interview their equivalent of that, of their intelligence service or their counterterrorism unit or whatever.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that works.
And I mean, there's kind of a side to it that is both an advantage, and also a negative as well, which is, specifically when it comes to conflict reporting, you see a lot of freelance journalists because, I mean, basically the model that they're doing is going to a place without, a lot of
no
security,
insurance,
no insurance,
nothing.
and operating there. And because it's so expensive for the big outlets and the risk profiles and everything, you can kind of jump ahead and get kind of those big pitches by basically putting yourself in danger.
Yeah.
And so there's always kind of a big risk reward to it too, that also makes it easier in a place like you said, the Central African Republic, or Mali or Libya, these kind of places. So I first started showing up in the Central African Republic in 2019, and so just a little bit after Wagner had touched down. And I think for me, it was very clear right away that the kind of like overarching narratives about Wagner and Russians in Africa as these kind of omniscient, hyper,
10 feet tall.
10 feet tall was not what was matching what I was seeing. And so I first realized that I had to understand the Central African Republic first before I could understand how Wagner fit into it. And then kind of the book started rolling from there.
We'll get deep into the book, but I mean, since you kind of talked about it a little bit right there, there's something interesting about this book that I thought you teased out sort of like on a more meta level about warfare, which is you point out that, especially in the chapters about Central Africa, that the way these conflicts sort of like coalesce is in a manner that all of the players involved get the benefit from in some shape or form. And I saw that. I mean, I think we saw it all over the world with ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
So ISIS came in, and these little groups of bandits in Mozambique, Philippines, wherever, got to raise the black flag, try to attract international attention. It brings in press attention. It gives them legitimacy. It gives the government, they get more American funding, counterterrorism funding to come in and fight them. And it gives U.S. military something to do. Like, we're sending our advisors. Everyone kind of gets something out of it.
Yeah. You hit on the whole book. I mean, but I mean, I think it takes, that's why I think it's so interesting talking to you, because you have a lot of experience kind of on the other side of it. And so some of these, like, kind of what we think of like these overall structures of conflict kind of become apparent over time. And the thing that was fascinating to me throughout the book is, and we can get into Yevgeny Prigozhin and these guys, but Wagner was operating in sort of an interesting kind of ambiguous area where it was both a commercial enterprise, exactly, like commercial and kind of also part of the state, and so where they were especially effective was where they could sell a narrative back to the Kremlin about why these initiatives that so happen to also involve gold mining and what have you are like within Russia's national interests, and kind of the overarching narrative. Well, the narratives that they used were both the war on terror, Russia's version of it. Russia has a long history of issues of terrorism at home, and fought a campaign against ISIS as well in Syria. And so Prigozhin, the founder of Wagner, he leveraged that to make sure his guys were in, but also kind of this new great power competition narrative, the competition between the US, China, and Russia. And you see how in the book, how everybody, like you said, positions themselves vis-a-vis the narrative in a way that is like politically expedient or profitable to them.
You also get into a little bit about what was I going to say? Geez, I'm sorry, I totally lost my train of thought already. Let's jump into the book.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Hey guys, I want to take a moment to tell you about tonight's sponsor for the show, which is Ridge Wallets. I've been using this for about 6 months now. Really enjoy it. This wallet is made out of carbon fiber, titanium, and steel, and it really holds up and lasts. So, in the past, I carried a leather wallet. It's made by, professional, has a small shop and does leather work. I mean, it was a nice wallet and I really loved it. But the problem with those wallets is they get thicker and thicker and thicker, and we end up carrying around something that's like, a little phone book in the back of our pocket after a while. And that leads to problems with your posture and everything else. So what I like about the Ridge wallet, it's really a minimalist design. So most of us are using cards these days, so it can hold all of your cards in here inside these elastic pieces that you can press out. And then there's a clip on the back. You can, I use it to clip money in when I do use dollars, can clip them in there. They have over 50 colors and styles, so it's not just functional. You can personalize it a bit as well. They have some that feature your favorite NFL teams and so forth. Losing your wallet is also pretty crappy. I've had that happen to me as well. Actually, that wallet, the leather wallet I was telling you about, I lost it on the subway. So there's that. But Ridge has an answer for that, Ridge AirTag attachment. And with that, you'll always know exactly where your wallet is before panic mode kicks in, all right? Ridge isn't just about wallets. They create premium everyday carry essentials like key cases, suitcases, and rings, all built with the same sleek, durable design. So right now, Ridge is having their once-a-year anniversary sale. Get up to 40% off at ridge.com/house. Just head to ridge.com/house to see their biggest sale of the year. After you purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. So guys, please go and check out Ridge wallets. This also makes a great gift. My girlfriend has one of these. My stepfather has one of these. So I've given them away too. I have one of them. And our producer, Dimitri, has one. So please go and check out Ridge wallets. So I think Prigozhin is a great starting point. Kind of the main character of your book.
Yeah.
Tell us about who Prigozhin is and sort of who he is in the context of like 1990s, early 2000s Russian politics.
Yeah. So, I mean, Prigozhin is an endlessly fascinating character, and he was one who I had hoped to actually interview for the book before his sort of epic demise. But he grows up on the wrong side of the tracks in the Soviet Union and is sort of a thief and a street thug. He goes away to prison, I think at 18, for robbing and strangulating a woman. She nearly died. Gets caught. Goes away to prison for 8 years. He gets out, and in the meantime, the Soviet Union is basically collapsing, and so he returns to what became again St. Petersburg from Leningrad, and it's right in the swing of the wild, chaotic 1990s, and Prigozhin joins in with a couple of gangsters who set him up as kind of the manager of these grocery stores at first. And then he eventually kind of leverages that to owning several restaurants that cater to the nouveau riche in Russia and the Russian elite. So, it's serving like the finest champagne and caviar, like the more expensive, the better. And this is where he most likely comes in touch with a kind of a younger Vladimir Putin at the time. He strangely, it's only Prigozhin himself who has claimed that he sold hot dogs.
Yeah, with his mom, right?
With his mom, stirring the mustard apparently, and that the cash was it was too much. They couldn't even count all the cash they were making from hot dogs, which, I mean, I could see hot dogs being a good in the 90s in Russia. McDonald's was making money hand over fist. So,
and I mean, maybe one of the great ironies of your book, if I recall correctly, you point out that Prigozhin probably made a lot more money from food catering than he ever did from his private military companies.
Yeah, no, and this is what's interesting is that like he, like you said, he leverages these. He's a guy of endless ambition and networking. He's always trying to meet the next most important guy. And he leverages those connections to getting a job providing meals, or get the contract for providing meals to the Russian military and the Russian schools. And that was, in the context of Russia, that's where you like manage to skim a lot off the top. Like that's where the serious money is made. And so that's probably always where most of his cash was coming from. And we can get into like his character later, but the fact that he was kind of this thuggish, uncouth ex-con with a chip on his shoulder goes into play. Who's not accepted by kind of the buttoned up Russian bureaucracy and some of the Putin's old friends, like really goes
like they see him as a Gopnik.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, exactly. And so that will become kind of like increasingly important over time. But he was always trying to overcome that stigma of basically being like a street thug ex-con from the Russian prison system.
And so how does he then make that jump from being, known as Putin's caterer to comic book villain? How does that how does he make that jump?
So we have to go to I guess it's particularly timely now. We have to understand the context of what is now kind of the first phase of the war in Ukraine, and also kind of how Putin's regime works, and so a guy like Prigozhin, he rises up, he gets these contracts. The Russian state is one, like any state, but more so than the U.S., is one with a high amount of ambition on what it wants to achieve, and a lot less capacity and resources to do it. And one of the ways that they filled these gaps within the system is that oligarchs will kind of go out and fund, these patriotic initiatives. For the oligarch, they might not always be making money on it, but it is sort of a form of like virtue signaling, like donating to a political party in a way, right? In the hopes that it's going to reap rewards later on. And so if we look at what was happening in Russia at the time. Oh,
just going to fix your mic there. You're good.
Cool. If we look at what was happening at Russia at the time. Oh,
you're good.
There we go. Perfect. In 2012, there are massive protests against Putin's proposed return to the presidency, and this is coming on the back of
Libya.
Yeah, this is coming on the back of Libya, the Arab Spring, the color revolutions, and Putin eventually returns to the presidency, but he's shaken by it, and there are people from all sorts of Russian ideologies are marching against Putin, from liberals like Navalny, who was killed much later on, but also a particularly worrisome group, which are like the Russian nationalists.
Yeah,
and these are, it's pretty.
The Night Wolves.
Is
that one of them?
Really the Night Wolves were kind of always like pro-Putin. There were a lot of guys. I talked to a guy a lot who's in the Russian imperial movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these guys are Orthodox and want the return of the Russian Empire, and they want to restore the Tsar.
Third Rome.
A third Rome. And to them, the Russian Federation, Ukraine, and Belarus are the artificial product of the Soviet Union and the Bolsheviks. And so not only is Ukraine illegitimate, but so is the Russian Federation, and therefore so is Putin, because he's the head of an entity that is illegitimate to begin with. And the Tsar is really what we want to go back to. And so these guys are marching against Putin, and Putin navigates his way through it, but he's shaken. Prigozhin, kind of ever the astute observer, puts out like a big documentary that called Anatomy of a Protest, which paints the protesters as like a conspiratorial Western stooges. Yeah, exactly. And right as kind of Putin is sort of consolidating again his position, the revolution in Ukraine breaks out. That what became known as the Maidan Revolution, and as Ukrainians are overthrowing the current government, wanting to go on a pathway to the EU and towards the West, the Kremlin makes the decision that they're going to seize Crimea in 2014. There are a number of reasons they do it. It was a very top-down decision. I mean, as you remember, probably it was a pretty well-done operation in terms of lack of bloodshed and effectiveness. And Russia's Black Sea Fleet is there. It's a warm port. It's important to Russians. Russian history in their mind it's important as a vacation spot. Russians fondly think of Crimea. The Russians turn to a mix of special forces and also these kind of nationalistic volunteers, like these Cossacks and guys who come in and kind of provide muscle, security, and like a degree of like, this is a local thing, right?
Yeah, the little green men that they talked about.
Like little green men, but then also just these like tough guys who like could be local, might not be local. And they get through, they take it, they pass a referendum where Crimea votes for to join the Russian Federation. Kremlin thinks it's basically done and dusted. But at the same time, there are these other regions, particularly in eastern Ukraine, the coal mining region of Donbass, where the kind of counter-revolution or anti-Maidan movement is taking place, and these people are taking over administrative buildings, declaring potentially themselves separatists, and they're expecting the Russian state to come in, just like they did in Crimea. Except the Russian state doesn't want to go in. They don't want to annex these territories. It's not the same thing as Crimea. They don't want more sanctions. They don't want more isolation. But Putin also can't be seen as among the Russian public of letting these guys in eastern Ukraine kind of being hung out to dry. And so the Kremlin is trying to figure out, how do we support these guys while not supporting them? And so they turn to a number of different things. They start letting through volunteers across the border to go and support the separatists. And then they turn to some of these groups that form these mercenaries, quote unquote, at the time, who form these units to cross over to support the separatists. And of course, again, you need a sponsor for these types of things, right? Financially and politically. And so a guy, Yevgeny Prigozhin, comes into contact with a GRU, Russian military intelligence, former military intelligence officer, Dmitry Utkin, who has a group of about, I think, 50 mercenaries at the time. And that forms the nascent Wagner group, which goes into Luhansk and starts supporting the separatists.
And then around the same time as Ukraine is happening, Syria starts happening. So how does he then goes from that initial contract in eastern Ukraine, and then the Russians make their presence into Syria.
Yeah.
What year was that? 2015?
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting because initially the guys in eastern Ukraine, they provide support. And then the Russians start sending in more just kind of covert actual military guys in. And these are also the little green men. And the idea is they want to get towards some sort of ceasefire. They want this thing to be over with. The first deal doesn't go through. Minsk 1, it was called. It was negotiated in Minsk. and so they're trying to get another ceasefire in Minsk too. The issue is that especially a lot of these kind of volunteers and separatist leaders who have gone from being like, you know, again, like Gopnik, like mechanic, to like owner of a fiefdom of like,
Warlord.
yeah, warlord. I mean, basically warlord. They're like, why would we stop? And so Wagner becomes sort of the enforcer. And so they start assassinating these kind of wayward separatist leaders as the Kremlin decides we have to take control of these kind of separatist areas and then negotiate and get some sort of ceasefire. And so in 2015, Minsk II is signed and the front sort of stabilizes. And for a lot of these volunteers, right, they just are like, they go home. A lot of them hate Putin, actually, and they're disappointed that the Russian state is now in eastern Ukraine.
I thought it was interesting that you kind of keyed in on the liquidations on their side, because I remember hearing about at the time some of the people, either they were involved in too many war crimes or they were involved in the shooting down of the Malaysian Airlines, that those people like got disappeared, a lot of them, because it was just going to be too much of an embarrassment.
Yeah, they got moved. I mean, Strelkov, who was kind of a very famous guy, the guy who like shot the first shot of the war, who was another one of these volunteer guys who was involved in the Malaysia Air downing. Yeah, they quietly moved him like into Russia. They couldn't disappear him. But there were a number of, again, like militia leaders, Cossack leaders. One guy, Batman, was his kind of call sign, nickname. He was gunned down, and then a Cossack leader, his car exploded on the way to his wedding. A car bomb went off. I mean, they were all just disappearing. Not really disappearing, disintegrating in mysterious ways. And we know that Wagner was part of at least one from internal documents. But anyways, kind of the opportunity, right, is diminishing in eastern Ukraine as the front is settling. And like you said, like luckily enough for Prigozhin, Russia overtly intervenes in Syria, and I want to say September 2015. And you know, one of the reasons that they do it is because they're isolated and they want to force the Americans into sort of a joint counterterror operation against ISIS. And so Prigozhin's lobbying to get his guys in. They come in very late 2015, early 2016. No one really knows what they're doing and like why they're there. They do some training of like local Assad forces, and then they get hit by I think by a missile or something, and a bunch of guys die. And the MOD, the Ministry of Defense, panics and they decide to send them home. And then it became very clear that that Russian air power alone was not going to do the job against both the rebels against Assad or ISIS. And so Wagner comes back in and they partner with a local Syrian PMC, and they start an offensive on Latakia, and eventually they take Palmyra.
This is the Desert Hawks?
This is the Desert Hawks, yeah, of the Jaber brothers. Yeah.
So I want to take a minute today to tell you guys about the Perfect Jean. I've been wearing them for a few weeks now and really enjoy them, and I just want to share it with our audience. You know, sometimes jeans have this problem where, you know, you guys all have seen these skinny jeans that they like crush your balls and, you know, it's just not comfortable to wear. Or the other way around, jeans are like too baggy. You know, you have this sort of like diaper in your ass area, it looks like. So there are these problems that, you know, different fits of different types of jeans have. And the Perfect Jean strives to fix that. Both the fit, but also the mobility, the maneuverability. It has a stretchy fabric. Like they say it's like yoga ready, but, you know, I would say it's athletics ready. You know, moving furniture, doing things around the house, you're not going to have that like super tight, like constricted fit that you feel like you're not going to be able to move around in. And there are over 400,000 people out there wearing these jeans at this point, so not all of them can be wrong. I hope you guys will go and check them out. So a few scenarios where you can wear these jeans and where they really come together. Everything from, doing yard work or doing things around your house. If you have to move furniture around or you have to do handiwork, they're perfectly comfortable. But you can wear them, getting your man spread on the subway, if that's your thing. So the perfect jean is great for all kinds of different environments, whether it's doing handiwork around the house or on the job or athletics. And we really hope you guys will go and check them out. For a limited time, our listeners get 15% off their first order plus free shipping at theperfectjean.nyc or Google The Perfect Jean and use the code HOUSE15 for 15% off. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectjean.nyc with promo code HOUSE15. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. So fuck your khakis and get the perfect jean.
And there's not a lot of love, as you probably saw in the book, between like the Syrians and the Wagner guys. And this is going to be a recurring theme. So they take Palmyra, and then again, they're sent home. The MOD basically says, thanks for everything.
And then they lose the city again.
And they lose the city. They take all the credit, which is always an issue in Russia, right? Because credit means like allocation of resources, being on Putin's radar.
I mean, it was interesting in a lot of these offensives in Syria where it seemed like they'd use the Wagner guys as like shock troops. And then afterwards, they'd bring in Spetsnaz dudes to do like the video interviews, with the Russian press. Like, oh yeah, we captured Palmyra. It's all great.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things that, and the Wagner guys were even frustrated too, that they felt that the Syrians were taking advantage of them, and kind of the Syrians would kind of, slowly disappear, from the action. And so they felt like they were being, used, in all sorts of ways, being thrown into it.
So this is my point that I forgot earlier that maybe we can come back to here. This might be a good point, is that we have this perception, I think, a lot of us in America and in the West, that Wagner is the Kremlin's proxy, that they issue their orders to this PMC and they go out there and fulfill the mission in Central Africa or Syria, or wherever it is, which is generally true. But you point out that it's a little bit more complicated than that, and that Wagner is also profit-oriented and they are rent-seeking. So they're out there looking to do for-profit operations and sometimes just doing their own thing. And that brings us into the Arcady oil fields and the Kanoko facility specifically.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think, and I feel like you probably understand, and your audience probably understands this better than most, like, like how does any government function? And I mean, especially, how does Russia function? Like Putin has the same 24 hours as we have. Right. The guy is not able to sit in front of a map and just be like, I want us to be in the Central African Republic. Russia is filled in the same way that America is filled with entrepreneurs who are going out there and kind of lobbying for what they think policy should be. And very often they're lobbying in a way that is kind of politically, beneficial in their self-interest. Or, I mean, like our capacity for rationalization is infinite. And so,
that's why we think he's a chess master, moving these pieces across the globe.
But it's also, like it's not even, and I try to explain too to people like, Russia is now a version of a capitalist society, right? And so as Americans, we don't think it's counterintuitive that you can kind of further the well-being of your country and make money at the same time. Like that is American, if you think, like Lockheed Martin will never say we're a profit-driven company. Yeah. They will say
protecting the homeland.
We're protecting the homeland, but they're also profit-driven. And so, there are versions of this in Russia that might look a little bit more, in some cases like a little bit more kind of rough around the edges, I suppose, and not as polished. But that is kind of how things are also done at a basic human level. And so you have both the supply and the demand, and you have a lot of you can have guys like Prigozhin who are going out there and trying to push things too.
Right.
And so yeah, like you said, they get kicked out of Palmyra. The Assad loses Palmyra again. The Russians lose it again without Wagner to ISIS, and so Wagner is brought back in. But this time, Prigozhin signs a deal directly with the Assad government, saying, we'll go after ISIS, but we get 25% of the proceeds from any oil and gas assets that we capture in this, or that we kind of return. And this sounds good. They come in, they launch an assault, they retake Palmyra, they're heading straight to the Euphrates. ISIS at this point is falling back. You have at the same time the SDF, the Kurds, backed by the Americans, coming in through the northeast. Initially heading towards Raqqa at the time, I think, as the Russians and Wagner are moving up. And at a certain point in late 2017, a couple of things are coming together, right? It seems clear that ISIS is collapsing. And it seems also clear from letters Prigozhin was sending to Assad that he wasn't getting paid for all the money that he was investing in this offensive on ISIS. And he's complaining. He's like, we've recovered X, oil fields and yada, yada. And you're not making us whole. I'm losing a lot of money here. And there are everyone knows about in Syria. Everyone knew about these Conoco facilities, which are sort of like the big money maker. It was ISIS's big money maker for fuel smuggling, sort of the prized asset. And so as it looks like ISIS is collapsing, both groups now are kind of positioning themselves for what the post-ISIS future is going to be. And so the SDF starts heading away from Raqqa and down into Deir ez-Zor, and the Russians are rushing up, and the SDF takes Conoco first. And you might know better than me, but I mean, there was obviously some U.S. Special Forces who are around. And Conoco lies right on the other side of the Euphrates, which also happens to be the deconfliction line between Russia and Assad forces and the SDF and U.S. And so that poses a problem for Prigozhin, who really wants these Conoco facilities. You want to just go into the whole thing?
Because I mean, he thought that we would just give it up, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
So I think so. And so what happens is Prigozhin decides he's going to take a gamble. And I've talked to like a bunch of people in Wagner about how they think it probably went down. I'm sure you have some good stuff on
do you think like it was like a fait accompli on Prigozhin's part? Like he's like, we'll go do this, and the Russian government will have to back us up.
I think it was part that. I think, and I mean, this is also how Russia works too. I think that he thought that at the time that the Americans would just fall back. And he probably got like a wink and a nod from some guys in the Ministry of Defense saying, if it works, it works.
Yeah. That's a very Russian.
Yeah, like, and if it doesn't, it doesn't work. And so I think he got some sort of signal like that. And if it does work out, big victory. If it doesn't, it's mercy,
it's a PMC, whatever.
It's a PMC, whatever. And so he decides to take the gamble. He's going to try to take Conoco from the SDF and the Americans. And this is on February 8th, 2018. In the evening, they gear up and they start rumbling towards closer, I think, to midnight, if I remember correctly. And the Americans see this whole buildup happening, and they're calling over the deconfliction line to the Russian MOD, being like, are these your guys? And 3 times the Russians say, no, they're not. And so I think it was on the 3rd time, and again, we probably have people listening in who know the American side much better than I do. But on the 3rd time, the Americans just got permission to
Hose them.
To hose them. And I mean, you probably know, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the amount of firepower that the Americans brought to this force was overwhelming and probably not necessary other than to send a message. Because, I mean, this was probably like, I would say a force of maybe like 300 guys most. And, you know, there were some tanks, but it was mostly guys, just, you know, and I mean, we were flying in
Apaches circling overhead, just machine gunning those dudes.
Yeah. And so it was just an absolute, they got absolutely destroyed. And then finally in the early hours of the morning, the Russians, you know, ask for a pause so that they can go collect their dead. And that was that. Prigozhin never tried to cross the Euphrates again. And he never really talked about it again. Like when I talked with the guys in Wagner, like it wasn't, you know, for them, it was like, okay, you know,
another day in the office.
Yeah, moving on. Yeah, and it wasn't really. It was something that was kind of like legendary within the community, the Wagner kind of community, but it was not something that they brought up.
And then he starts making the jump into Africa, right? Around.
Yes, a little bit before.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think we start getting into all the different kind of versions of Wagner, right? And so, and I think the way that I think about it too is that the relationship between Wagner and the state depended on the context and the geographies, the theaters in which they were operating. And Ukraine, I mean, obviously then and even more obviously now, is something existential to the Russian state. And so Wagner was working quite closely with the Ministry of Defense. And there are all other kind of types of security institutions that are there, right? The FSB, the GRU, SVR, and the same in Syria too. That was there was nothing covert about Syria. It was an overt Russian military intervention. No one was trying to hide anything. Wagner's usefulness was much more plausible deniability back home, that the official statistics of Russians soldiers coming home in caskets was much lower because they were contractors over there. And so the Russian public wouldn't question too much, why are we in this far-flung location?
Do you think that's a lesson that the Russians learned? I mean, and I think you may have pointed out even in the book, it's like the Russians don't need to mimic the West in order to come up with something sneaky. But I mean, do you think they saw the Blackwater model and saw that, oh, that's something we can use to affect Russian foreign policy without as much blowback?
I think so. I mean, especially in Syria, I think that was a more conscious decision, because that was the first time that Russia, the state, was really moving outside of what it considers its near abroad of, you know, the former Soviet Union. And I don't think that there was an incredible amount of support at that time for intervention in
military
Syria,
adventures.
For military adventures. And so Wagner kind of helped. And there's also that very specific kind of Russian experience in the 90s in Chechnya, and the kids coming home in caskets, and the mothers who are a very effective political force in Russia, and so they, I think that they also, probably chance. I mean, they surely were watching what America was doing in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they were certainly picking up on how many contractors were over there. We know that because General Gerasimov even, mentions the use of Western, PMCs in their mind to overthrow these governments and what have you. But I think that they saw. I think that's how they recognized that as something useful, and that was probably worth imitating. And I think that Prigozhin too, now that he had this mercenary force underneath him, kind of envisioned himself as a sort of Eric Prince, or maybe even Barlow, or one of these kind of big entrepreneurs in this space. But to go back to kind of what you were saying, once you get outside of Syria, like Russia's footprint in these other places is very light, and we know that because just the state isn't really there. And so I talked with one guy who was the head of Prigozhin's gold mining operation in Sudan, and the way that he told me about kind of how everything went down was that in 2016, probably a GRU guy goes to Prigozhin in St. Petersburg and is like, "Hey, I got an opportunity to like dig gold in Sudan. You interested?" And Prigozhin obviously is like Prigozhin, and so he's like, "Yeah, hell yeah." And so he sends this guy who I talked to, Mikhail Potyopkin, to go there. And this guy, again, this is like as we get back to like, what is like, who are these guys, and like, are they're 10 feet tall? Like, they're kind of just like buddies in St. Peter's. Like, they're all kind of part of the same like little network. And then, someone is like, "Oh, my cousin is like real good at this." And they're like, "Okay, send him to Sudan. See if he could like do a gold feasibility study, And like, and so like he goes down there and he realizes that these guys are all like swindlers. And he goes back to Prigozhin. He's like, "It's not going to work." And he's like, "You don't know anything about gold," which is like true. He did it. And so then he's like, "Go back and figure it out." And so then he goes back and figure it out, and they end up like inking this deal between Sudan and Russia that Russia will provide military trainers, not something that is like totally unknown in the West by any stretch, and would also get these kind of concessions in gold mining, and that's kind of what kicks it off. And then Prigozhin starts sending out his associates doing business development in a way.
Something I want to get into, and maybe a surprising part of your book, was you talk about 2018 and Wagner Group in Madagascar, which I had not heard about before.
Yeah.
And this may be a good point also to point out that Wagner was not just a mercenary organization in the sense that like sending in shooters and fighters, right?
Yeah.
That there's a more robust support system there, that like he brought in like political analysts for some things, got information operations, disinformation operations, and like it sounded like some election racketeering going on in Madagascar.
Yeah.
Like I think you said something that like they try to work with the incumbent, but then they see that's not going to work, so they go to like his competitors. They ally with some guy who's named like Dr. Doom or the Prophet of Doom or something. Who's like a cult leader.
He was a cult leader.
It's like this is fucking crazy.
Oh my God. Yeah, there's so many. Every story is just like, they were just always up to just crazy, insane stuff. But like, the president of Madagascar shows up in Moscow, and he meets with Prigozhin and then the Russian leadership, and talks about how he wants, their help. And so Prigozhin says, "Oh, I have these like political consultants who can go down Um, and I mean, this is so all of these things like I think all like what we're thinking of when we're thinking about Wagner, like these are all it's I mean I'm sure the audience knows this is kind of like well known, but like there was no LLC Wagner LLC registered somewhere in the Cayman Islands, right? It became a collective term for all of the companies that and shell companies and what have you that revolved around Prigozhin. And this guy was like, if he had a love in life, it was to create shell companies and and have ever more complex like financial structures. And so he but a lot of it was born first like in Russia, right? And so there's that scene as well with a friend of mine who went undercover at the Internet Research Agency, which became like super famous, obviously during the 2016 U.S. presidential elections for interference. And the start of this whole like troll farm thing was kind of just to go after Prigozhin's like opponents at home and just like post about them and to like post
Shit posting.
Yeah, just like shit posting and like shit and like giving like good comments about like his catering company, you know, like and then but he is, to his credit, he is incredibly entrepreneurial and he understands and he's always thinking about how can I like create synergies between these various businesses that I'm trying to get into. And so he develops like this slew of services that can be offered. And so in Madagascar, it's political consultants, and they're coming out of that St. Petersburg scene around Prigozhin. And so yeah, they go down and like, I mean, they don't know anything about Madagascar and its politics. And so like you said, they first start backing and they make like a lot of mistakes that like I don't even think like deliberately, just like accidentally breaking the law and stuff like that. Like, you know, like starting a newspaper and like and that was like illegal. They like give out these pens that like misspell the president's name.
Yeah.
And then they end up like realizing that he's going to lose. And so then they also like have this new candidate. There's like a lot of guys running in this election. So they're going around and trying to find like the right one. And there's this guy, Pastor Myhol, who runs the Church of the Apocalypse. And like,
That sounds promising.
yeah. And like 20 years earlier, God told him that he would be president of Madagascar.
As one does.
So that's why he's running. And the Russians like give him money. And like obviously that doesn't like work out. And so, but in the end, one of the guys who they, you know, ended up winning. But, you know, it wasn't, yeah. I mean, and I think again, we get back to like, you know, these guys are often bumbling through.
You could write that into a novel and people would be like, come on, dude,
Yeah,
stop.
I mean,
like that's
yeah.
too over the top.
Yeah.
That would never happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, they continue to do like, you know, in Carr, they're opening breweries and like vodka distilleries, and then like attacking the other brewery that's operating there. I mean, they're always up to. Yeah.
So they got in their hooks in pretty good. It sounds like Sudan was sort of like their foothold in Africa.
Sudan was initial, but like very quickly after that, they
CAR.
go on this quick like period of like expand. And so in Central African Republic, someone in the Central African Republic reaches out to them saying, "Hey, are you interested in something similar?" They get everything put together and they get that through in 2017 too. And so they touched down there in 2018. And then, I mean, probably 6 months after that, Prigozhin's meeting with Haftar in Libya. And so they're like, and you know, for every one of those, they're like throwing things against the wall, right? Like we should see if there's anything in Zimbabwe. We should see if there's anything in like Congo, South Sudan. And so they're out there trying, and these are the ones that like stuck.
CAR, I mean, that's where it sounds like, these guys really became like comic book villains. I mean, you have the quote in there from somebody like, yeah, they told us to kill the women and children because it'll terrorize the rebels, and, like, holy shit. Tell us about, the Black Russians, these like death squad ops that they went on, and they had these commanders with names like Zombie and Lotus. I mean, it's.
Yeah. I mean, Central African Republic was also, I mean, that's where I spent the most of my time. And I met a bunch of the guys over there, the Wagner guys over there. And I traveled like throughout the country, and I think it was the most interesting case just in general, right? Because they so I mean, the first thing that they do when they show up there is the Car government owns just like basically the capital, and it's all these predatory armed groups in the countryside. And so Prigozhin gets his guys together, and they decide they're going to like get a peace deal between the Car government and all these armed groups. And there's a fun section about how they go about that. And they do it. And they bring them all in, and it's looking good. Now there's kind of territorial integrity, figure out how to do mining, and I mean, this was also a good, like, peace was good.
Yeah.
But the elections are coming up. It's very destabilizing. The agreement can't hold, and 6 of the armed groups join together to form a new armed coalition, and they start going down to take Bangui. And I was in Bangui at the time when this was all going down, and that's when like things really changed, and Wagner's mission went from like a training mission like it was in Sudan. The decision was made to defend Bangui. And so they bring in like 1,500 to 2,000 guys from Syria, and it becomes the Syrian operation just in Car. They defend Bangui, which like even like humanitarians and everybody like quietly thanks them for doing. And this is the weird things that happen on the ground, right? And then they go on the counteroffensive. And it's very effective. And like Central Africans, for the most part, are very happy, unless they're from some of the groups that are perceived to be as supportive of the armed groups. Because like you said, the Russian doctrine around counterinsurgency is not like the same as kind of some of the other models. And so in some of these communities where they perceive them to be as supportive of the armed groups, very often it's ethnic. They employ these tactics, which are just, scare, create intense pain, scare the shit out of people. There's a lot of killing in the belief that they won't support armed groups or harbor armed groups again. And in the case of the Central African Republic, it is relatively effective and also relatively popular among the general population. That, for them, they've lived in precarity and in conflict for like 20 years. Like this, it's not, the idea of people dying is not, it's also the poorest, least developed country in the world. Like, I think at least 1 in 5 babies doesn't make it to 1. I mean, so this is and so for most people, it's a question of, is my life better under the armed groups or Wagner? Am I able to go to my field and cultivate and do a little farming and go to the next village without getting killed and robbed? And for a lot of people, that was better, despite the brutality that was going on at the same time.
Let's jump a little bit into Libya.
Yeah.
There's an interesting There's a lot of interesting
Yeah,
stuff.
Libya
happening
is
there. With Saif Gaddafi, and then Turkish intelligence gets in, sending Syrian mercenaries. This is like also kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of my favorite, not favorite. I mean, it's always tough because it's like my favorite and tragic moment in the book.
Your favorite atrocity in Africa.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. My favorite tragic moment is, like you said, Prigozhin kind of, we can go into, there's that interesting section where kind of Prigozhin is actually muscling his way in, likely a little bit, into the Libya portfolio from some guys who were connected to the FSB, some other kind of smaller Russian PMC rivals. But he does get in there. He strikes a deal with Haftar, and the Libya. I always wanted to put Wagner in the overall context of these conflicts, right? They are a piece of the puzzle. They never are the reason that there was civil war in Libya or the Central African Republic. And so to put them in the context of Libya, I wanted to talk about all of the different kind of mercenaries or security entrepreneurs or contractors, what have you, who are operating. And I mean, when it came to Haftar's attack on Tripoli started in April 2019, I mean, he had the armed groups, rebel groups from Darfur. There were the ex-Janjaweed guys who had fought the Darfur armed groups who were fighting alongside them. There were the Chadian rebel groups. You had
Tuaregs.
Yeah, Tuareg. You had Wagner coming in. All of this is kind of backed by the UAE financially. Some American security entrepreneurs are around and about. And initially, kind of the offensive is going well. They're on the outskirts of Tripoli, the southern suburbs called Ain Zara. But as the government in Tripoli is increasingly kind of worried, they sign a memorandum of understanding with Turkey on maritime boundaries that just so happened to I think draw a straight line from Tripoli to Turkey that that puts all of Cyprus in, all of the East Med is now all of a sudden Turkish territory.
Oil going out, guns coming in.
Yeah. And so in exchange, Erdogan taps the Turkish intelligence, the Turkish military advisors start coming in, the Bayraktar drones start coming in, and then through Turkey's own very close to the state PMC, Sadat, they start shipping in Syrian mercenaries from the territories that are under Turkish control in Syria. And then Wagner,
which is a small strip
that they had moved, that they had buffered into. A lot of guys from the SNA and kind of these Al-Hamzat militias who were over there.
I mean, that sounds really bad. Like the Italians have this saying, the slaves of the slaves.
Yeah.
If you're a Syrian mercenary working for a Turkish PMC in Libya, that sounds your life expectancy.
Yeah, and there were guys I interviewed for it, and it was always interesting to get people's different perspectives of the different conflicts in which they were in, and for these guys they fought in Syria, they were saying for the most part, it's just a lot of shooting like this. And they were the artillery was never accurate, so we didn't have to worry too much. And all of a sudden they're on the Libyan front with effectively Turkey versus Russia and UAE. And the Libyans have a lot of money. And so, I don't know if you've ever managed to go through Libya, but it's very different. The militias have a lot of money. And so they have like,
Like this is oil money?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like billions of dollars swimming around there. And so so it's very different. And so they show up on this front line, there's drones going, and they're like, what the hell did we get ourselves into? And some of them are like, want to go back. And the Turks are like, you're not going back at all. And then they find out like that they don't really have weapons, and there's a lot of like Captagon and drugs getting smuggled in, which the Libyans don't like. The local Libyans don't want them there. And so it's a total mess. And of course, the Turks had like delegated the recruitment to the Syrian commanders. And so the Syrian commanders, and so it just becomes like a cash scheme, right?
Yeah.
And so the Syrian commanders start sending guys over, they collect the salaries, and then the guys aren't getting paid. It's just a total mess. And then Wagner starts recruiting Syrians from Assad-controlled territory. And so now they're bringing in Syrians. And there's this was kind of the tragic moment I'm talking about, where you have this situation where Syrians who had fought each other in Syria are now facing off against each other in Tripoli,
It's surreal.
in Libya, and it's surreal. And it was one of those things where you're like, it feels significant, but I can't quite put my finger on why.
You put
it's-
your finger on it maybe earlier on in the book where you talk, if I recall correctly, I mean, I may have read this elsewhere, about like the period of Italian history of mercenary fiefdoms.
Yeah.
Like it feels very much like that sort
Yes.
of like, early Renaissance era.
Yeah, and I think that this is like where I was trying to get at. The subtitle is like the new era, right? And that was always tough to try and tease out as well, because we've had mercenaries for as long as we know, and so people always want, what is new, and then what is new is that we're returning to something kind of in a way,
Right.
But what is different is that the technology has changed, the logistics has changed, and the resources that are at these people.
It's global.
It's global, and so this became kind of, in a way, like the dark underbelly of globalization, right?
Right.
Like the same processes that come together that allow Amazon Prime to give me, deliver something same day to me, are also making it possible to ship, Syrians relatively easily from Syria to another location to fight, and the distance is collapsing.
Let's jump into, at least I feel like we should touch upon briefly, Mozambique and Mali.
Yeah.
Those were two other places that Wagner tried to go into.
Yeah. Mozambique, again, this is during this period of kind of intense expansion, trying to get everywhere. And one of the places where they successfully managed to get in was in Mozambique. And just immediately the mission is a disaster. And I talked to some Russians about it, and they said that actually in this case, like Prigozhin was being warned by people in the MOD that it's like not a good idea to go in. The politics at the time were not conducive. There was a big peace deal that was about to kind of come together after like decades of conflict between Frelimo and Renamo. And
Are those organizations even still around?
the crazy Cold War relics. And then there's a big division between the police, the police and the army, and they hate each other's guts. And then this kind of unknown thing is kicking off in the north in Cabo Delgado, where at the time, like no one really knows what's going on, but there's an insurgency, and it's getting close to these massive like LNG fields that are not owned, but being exploited by the French, Total.
LNG is light natural gas.
Yes, yeah. And so of course Prigozhin's like, perfect, like let's go in. and he inks a deal and they show up and like they don't, like no one knows why they're there. Like it's not clear what the mandate is. The guys decide that they want to actually go like to Cabo Delgado, where I can't remember if it's like around this time that they declare themselves an ISIS affiliate.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, what's going on in Cabo Delgado? And so they show up, they're in this kind of dense jungle that they're not prepared for. They have a bunch of drones that they can't use, and they basically fall into these ambushes, lose a bunch of guys. And I think, and I put in the book, like I think the standard kind of story was like, oh, they lost a couple guys or they lost guys, it's a failure, like, and they leave. And I think kind of like tied to like our whole previous, like what we were talking about previously, like Prigozhin was like like he had a high tolerance for losing guys if it was worth it, right? Like, I mean, this is after Hisham, right? Where Hisham, the Conoco fields in Syria. And they had lost, I don't know, like maybe around 10 guys or something like that in Mozambique. I think the reason that he pulled out was that the first of all, there was one institution that hated him. And then I don't think that he saw a way that he could sell it back to the Kremlin in a way that would result in kind of meaningful subsidies and support.
You point out repeatedly, I think, that for Russia, Africa was just not a priority. Like, which makes it kind of interesting that he was gallivanting all around North and Central Africa.
So, like, the thing that I wish, like, I would have been, and like, I know the guy, and he talked to me for the book, and he like saved this whole quote for like after the book gets published, but. He likes to think of himself. He works for a Russian PMC, and he likes to think of himself as, and he is a historian and kind of an intellectual as well. And the way that he described it, he told me, he's like, John, you have to go back and look at how Russia conquered Siberia. He said the way that it happened, this is like the 16th century, is a Cossack leader. He goes to the Tsar. Yermak is the guy's name, and he says, give me the troops and give me the funds, and I'll go conquer Siberia for you. And the Tsar goes, that's interesting. Prove to me that you're successful, and then I'll give you the funds. And so Yermak goes to like the boyars, the barons around, and he raises up the money from them to go out, and then he starts conquering Siberia. He starts running into issues when he's at the Chinese border. So he goes back to the Tsar and says, I need your help. And the Tsar says, sure, we're taking this over. We got it from here. And he gets kicked out. and the guy who works at the Russian PMC is like, in this sense, like what Prigozhin was working as he was in a very Russian style in Africa is how he put it. And it's sort of the Francis Drake model, right? Where like you go and you plant the flag in the name of the state, and you're hoping that the state is then going to like come in.
It's interesting with Prigozhin and also with Eric Prince, you sense that bitterness. Like neither of them, I think, really understood at the time that they were being used as tools by the state apparatus, right? It was only in retrospect that. Yeah.
And I mean, I think, and Eric is a good example of a guy too, who goes out there and is looking, is looking forward for these
opportunities,
these opportunities that you can then the primary client is really your own government, right? And for a PMC, what is kind of what I would think is sort of the sweet spot is you have to find these places that present a threat of some sort, right? Or a need of some sort to your home government. The threat can't be so high that the government wants to just send in its own troops, but it can't be like too low because then why would they fund
It
you?
reduces your prestige.
Yeah. And so you have to find something that's like kind of right at that perfect, like we should be there, but like not too much. And that's like the sweet spot.
Low intensity conflict.
Low intensity
Africa,
conflict
yeah.
in Africa and that's why everyone is there. And so, you talk to Eric, and some of his guys. I mean, they were oscillating around, orbiting the same opportunities.
Right.
Prigozhin got into Mozambique because he was able to underbid those guys so much because he was initially able to
labor is cheap.
Yeah, labor is cheap, but also he had that preferential access to Putin, and he had deep pockets himself that he was willing to invest like crazy money in for a long-term investment. In Mozambique, though, he couldn't get it to work for whatever reason on the economics and on the political side.
So Ukraine take two.
Yeah.
We get into the 2020s. Tell us a little bit. This was an interesting thing, an interesting lead in. Tell us about like Russian imperial myth making in that period and how it kind of intersects with Wagner.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the like imperial boomerang effect, right? Where the policies in the periphery kind of come back home in a way. And so over time, I think the Kremlin more generally and Putin as well, like come to kind of believe their own myth making about Russia as this powerful state, about the West in Ukraine. Putin is going to be this next, the leader that returns Ukraine back to the fold. And so at least, Putin himself becomes like also personally kind of obsessed with this, especially during COVID-19. He's like a famous germaphobe.
Yeah.
He
isolated.
He's very good at isolating anyone who wants to see him, even like his best friends. They have to quarantine for like 3 weeks. And Prigozhin isn't a best friend. Prigozhin's a guy who can like he's an acquaintance and like he can get his ear. Putin likes him because he's like rough around the edges. He's a little bit different. And he'll do whatever, Putin says. But, he's not like the closest confidant. And so, and as you can imagine, like Prigozhin too has made a lot of enemies as he's been going around doing all of the crazy stuff that he does. And so, the decision is made that, that from the Russian perspective, the Ukrainians are not willing, to come to a final resolution on Crimea and eastern Ukraine. They need to be, the regime in Kiev needs to be overthrown. They think that this will be a relatively easy thing. All their spies who are basically like not working that much in Ukraine are just sending them back. Like, yeah, they love Russia over here, what have you. And so they're believing their own kind of, it's a circular information space, right? They believe what they're producing, the information that they're producing. And so for the operation, the Ministry of Defense initially does not want to go have Prigozhin there. He's a thorn in their side in so many different ways. And so they try to raise their own what they call PMCs, but I mean they're really kind of just volunteer.
But I mean, they thought this was a 3-day military
this was gonna be
special
yeah,
operation.
yeah.
You don't need to bring in these PMCs.
Yeah,
right?
they raise their PMCs for their own reason that they think if we need them we got them, but they really thought that this was going to be very quick, like you said, like 3 days, and it very clearly was not, and so it's already going pretty poorly for the Russians, like. I mean, immediately, and a few weeks in, and Prigozhin finally gets the call that he's allowed to get his Wagner guys in, and he was pissed about not getting in because this is where you make real money, right? I mean, this is the full scale war. Central African Republic is nothing to the Kremlin. This is everything to Putin too. And so he gets his guys in. Ironically, like they're mercenaries, contractors, what have you. But these guys are like have had more experience than most soldiers in the Russian military, even some of the special forces guys, right? They've been in the interim, they've been fighting on the ground in Syria, throughout Africa. It's not going to be the same thing by any stretch, but they have more experience. And so they start to make a difference. And Prigozhin, all of a sudden is, in the limelight. He officially is, the founder of Wagner. He's in Putin's good graces, and he starts promising ever bigger things. He eventually promises Bakhmut, that he's going to take Bakhmut. And the MOD too is looking to get as many guys as they can now for the front. And so they start leaning on Wagner as this kind of brand of, cool guys in the Russian context of, to bring in men to recruit. And so the billboards are going up across Russia, join PMC Wagner. So he's recruiting new volunteers. And then he gets access to Russia's prison population.
The Project K.
Project K. And again, we don't know like exactly. I mean, it was a wink and a nod from the presidential administration that Prigozhin gets this right to do something which is illegal in Russia. And this is always a double-edged sword, right? Because
if it works, you're good to go. But if it fails, you're going to prison.
You're going to prison. And this is always the world in which he's operating, right?
And you lay out this like totally insane scene where like a helicopter comes and lands in the prison. Dude gets off and it's like, we have a special mission for you.
Yeah. No, and it was really, and he knew how to ham it up. Now his ex-con, his history as an ex-con comes into play because he can speak like the language of
prison Russian. Yeah.
Prison Russian. And he shows up at prisons across the country, and he gives the deal of if you fight for me for 6 months, you go free. Your criminal record is expunged. He is open. He says, my losses are worse than Stalingrad, and that any deserters will be shot on sight. But I mean, he taps into this old Soviet history of
we will sacrifice
and some of the language. And so the Soviet in the Soviet during Stalin, during World War II, he swept to the gulags for prisoners, and they had penal battalions as well of, people who became politically unsavory, had their own special units that they would throw into the worst parts of the fight. And the whole idea was that you atone for your sins with blood.
Oh.
And literally this language actually shows up again in the contracts that these guys are signing. That it's a chance to atone for their sins, with blood for, Mother Russia. And so up to, I think, 50,000 guys end up taking the deal.
Holy shit.
And Prigozhin, they go through a very intense 2-week training with like Russian special forces instructors and like very kind of experienced Wagner instructors. and then they're thrown into the front, and they're used as kind of human waves going at first, going first, jumping over and attacking, and the life expectancy was pretty short. I think about probably half of them perished.
You talk about in the book how they basically use these dudes as like scouts, like to go out and see where the enemy is.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah,
they'd
yeah.
all get wasted. I'm like, oh, okay, we'll send out another group. So you find out a little bit more.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
oh, that group gets wasted. I'm like, okay, so we know they're sort of around that area.
Yeah, and I mean, and the thing is, and I was there on the front, and I was talking to the Ukrainians who were dealing with it, and it is obviously incredibly inefficient, but it is an effective method if you have unlimited access.
Meat power.
Yeah, yeah, and so for the Ukrainian, I mean, and we can get into should they have even been defending Bakhmut in the first place and not have pulled back to a more strategic position, but for the ratio was probably like one Ukrainian for every 4 Russians or something like that was getting casualtied out. But in the Russian mindset, they were using an expendable force, and the Ukrainians were losing some of their kind of most talented, experienced guys in this fight because, again, like you said, they're used to find the positions. If you send out 10 guys, 8 might, but then 2 of them do jump in the trench. They get 1 or 2, and it's just endless
Attrition.
It's just attrition, and this is how Prigozhin is going to take Bakhmut. And but ultimately his star is ascending. He's everywhere. He's known internationally now. Bloomsbury's like, wait, we have a book about this guy. Like, why? And I'm sitting there like, oh my God. But his ego is getting increasingly, I mean, he's already a narcissist and very egotistical. It's getting, it's reaching all sorts of new heights. And then the Ministry of Defense cuts off his supply of Russian prisoners, which is effectively cutting off his means of taking Bakhmut.
Well, did they do that for an actual reason? Like, I have to think it's not because of like on moral grounds, but
Well, it wasn't, because the Ministry of Defense was also recruiting prisoners.
this was about the time where the Russian MOD starts taking over the private military companies, right?
It's pretty soon after that. So they cut off Prigozhin. There's continuing. The MOD itself is continuing to recruit from prison. So it was not a moral thing.
But it's like MOD's taking control of this.
Yes, MOD's taking control of this. And because the MOD has more leverage, they get the Russian parliament to like
Rubber stamp
like the legal backing for them to be doing this. And so Prigozhin is getting kind of squeezed out, and he's going in, and he can't get to Putin. So what's the best way for him? He is good at recognizing the cards that he has and like the advantage that he has over his opponents, and where he has an advantage in this situation is on social media.
Yeah, posting through it.
And he's going out there and he's giving updates from the front, like much closer than like the Minister of Defense Shoigu is ever going to go. And Shoigu can't post on Telegram. He's the Minister of Defense. And so he starts going after the Minister of Defense about how they're cutting him, not giving those guys enough ammunition.
Where's my ammunition?
Where's my ammunition? Like, these decadent bureaucrats in their mahogany offices, they've forgotten like the average Russian soldier, and so, I mean, that's kind of his route to get back onto Putin's radar, and it's not working. And then ultimately, the thing that like snaps is the MOD is pushing for all people fighting in Ukraine to now re-sign under contract with the Ministry of Defense. And so for Prigozhin, who had mentioned in one of those like many Telegram messages that he's sending, and he does it in such that way that he's like, some people are saying that that having all this big mercenary army like makes me political or something, and it's like, oh really? Like some people are saying, and so he recognizes it, and now what makes him political is about to be taken away from him. And I think and if you look at kind of his personality already at this point, like he is not some dude who is going to like fade quietly into the night.
He's not going to accept a quiet desk job.
No, like no, yeah. There's no log cabin in Siberia. That's like waiting for him to like chop wood before the helicopter comes in saying we need you for one last mission. So like, and so he always, when in doubt, he doubles down.
Well, speaking of which, let's talk about the mutiny.
Yeah. I mean, and so this is where he basically decides that the way that he's going to get himself out of this situation with the Minister of Defense Shoigu is that he's going to kill him. And so
bold move.
It's a bold move. And so he turns, his force, they cross from Ukraine into southern Russia. They take over the southern military headquarters
Rostov
on Don, and he's looking for Shoigu, and Shoigu isn't there, and so then he's like, they've taken the thing, and I think it's so tough to tell like how much of this was like planned. At some point, he's kind of clearly freewheeling. But so they've taken over the southern military command headquarters. He's not there. Some of the Russian generals are trying to like talk with him, and he's just like, give me Shoigu, and they're like, we can't do that. And he's like, okay. And so then he declares kind of this march for justice, and he turns his guys from there, and they start heading up the highway to Moscow. And I talked to one of the participants for the book, and I was like, what was your mission? And they were like, yeah, it was very simple. Like we were going to try to take over the Ministry of Defense, and like in the process, Shoigu was going to like have been shot, accidentally. But like the whole thing was like kill the Minister of Defense and create some sort of fait accompli, which sounds crazy that like, oh, because you killed my Minister of Defense, I now have to name you my Minister of Defense. And I think too that Prigozhin at that point was also hoping that the Russian military was going to like rise up with him. And that wasn't happening. They're getting closer to Moscow, and it's like closer and closer to the point of no return. And like for the first time, he just like calls something off, which is like not his tendency to do.
He did that on his own.
I mean, Lukashenko, the Belarusian leader, brokered some sort of agreement. I think he was probably looking for
an exit
strategy, and so he calls it off. And for the next couple months, everyone's like waiting, like what is going to happen? And he's moving around everywhere, trying. They're making a move to Belarus because Wagner can't be in Russia anymore.
They've been exiled.
So he's doing this move to Belarus, but he's also trying to like lobby for them to keep the Africa operations. He's trying to prove, that he is still the man to do that. And then ultimately 3 months later, he gets on a private jet with Utkin, his number 2 guy, and a bunch of top lieutenants. And they take off from Moscow, heading to St. Petersburg, and midway through, plane explodes, and he comes crashing back down to earth. So, yeah.
And Putin's now famous quote that he was a man with a complicated fate.
Yeah.
His eulogy.
Yeah. And I mean, he even said something. I mean, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said. He said he did a lot of things. Sometimes he did things for me. Like, yeah, he was a man of like complicated faith. But like, yeah, it was like, yeah, it was, yeah. And then like, I think a couple weeks later, Putin's like, oh, they did the investigation and like someone was drunk with a grenade on the plane.
Sounds legit.
And it's yeah, and that was that, and there and that was I mean, there was no effort to like disabuse.
Yeah. They don't want to
They
disabuse.
didn't want to. Yeah, no. It was there was no reason to. I mean, it was an extraordinary way to do it.
Yeah.
And it was meant to be.
Are you getting my point?
Yeah, exactly. I think though that Prigozhin again this like speaks to his ego and at the time because people were like, didn't he like expect? And I like don't think that he actually did. I think that he somehow thought he had gotten away with
That
it.
his balls were so big.
Yeah. I think because only that way can you understand how the mutiny could have occurred in the first place. Because again, how are your balls so big that you like turn on Moscow?
Yeah.
Like you got to be already like
Pretty out there.
outside a few standard deviations outside of like the norm in terms of like and so kind of inevitably he thought that he got away with it in a way and he was the last one to find out, I suppose.
Post Prigozhin, what is the present for Wagner? I mean, does it still exist?
I mean, yes, but it's still very much. I mean, now it is very much under the control of the MOD, and it depends. Again, we get back to like each intervention was very different, and so, we didn't get a chance to talk too much about Mali, but if we think about like Africa, right? In Libya. After Haftar's failed offensive, there's a ceasefire in October 2020. You got the Turks and the Russians on either side who are kind of guaranteeing a stalemate. Nothing's really moving. And so there are Wagner guys who are stationed there. The MOD shows up and it's like, hey, here's a new contract. Most people sign. Sudan at that point had like gone through its own issue of outsourcing like security to paramilitary and is in like a full-scale civil war with the RSF and the Sudanese military. But Wagner is still in Mali and in the Central African Republic. And in CAR, they show up. And again, this is a place where like it wasn't important. And so Prigozhin had the ability to there was no natural check on him. And so he could expand into whatever opportunity he saw fit. And so they had breweries, vodka distilleries. I mean, they were in logging, mining. They were doing diplomatic activity. I mean, it was like a kind of a British East India Company thing going on. And so the guys in the military like show up and you can imagine these are like, kind of bureaucratic guys and they look at all of this and they're like, we don't understand what the hell's going on here. Only the guys who are here do. And like, if it's not broke, like, let's not, it's like not important enough for us to like do it, do anything. So like, I think some bank account numbers shifted in terms of where things are getting transferred and like some people were replaced, but it was left largely intact. And then in Mali, where you have this kind of mix of MOD advisors and Wagner on the ground going after only 2,000 guys, going after two different kind of jihadist armed groups, one Al-Qaeda, one ISIS affiliate. And then they decide to also take on Tuareg separatists in the north. It's a full deteriorating situation. They don't really know like how to hand it over because resources too are already constrained with everything that's going on in Ukraine. And so they're kind of like trying to fix the plane in the air, like as we speak. And so But again, like all of these things still now are, there's no kind of like independent aspect to the legacy Wagner right now. It's all in one way or another kind of subordinate to the state.
I mean, that kind of leads us to like a bigger question for Russia, but also for the rest of the world. Like we had these kinds of conversations, I feel like through the war on terror years about many conversations, maybe over philosophizing about it. The state losing the monopoly on violence and these private military companies, and is the state becoming irrelevant or subsiding and giving way to these transnational corporations? There's like this very larger like conversation to have about that. In the aftermath of Wagner, because Wagner does sound like it's kind of like the press's worst nightmare about Blackwater, which did some bad things, also did some good things, but but Wagner was really like off the rails and sounds like it became that well, I mean, geez, the mutiny is the epitome of it, right? That you create this monster that's going to come after you.
Yeah.
What conclusions do you have about the private military company industry and the future of warfare after writing this book?
It's obviously here to stay, and I think it's probably only going to grow from here. If not for the only reason that Wagner itself and Prigozhin and his associates went out there and they created a market for their product as well. And now that Wagner has existed, it's again it's like everything, right? It's tough to close Pandora's box once something is out there. Even if Wagner itself goes away, there are going to be other people. And I think what I tried to do with this book as much as humanly possible is make it about like the actual people, because I don't love it when we talk about like, what is Russia doing, or like what is China doing, like these anthropomorphized like,
right,
China is in Africa because minerals, and I want, like, Wagner was a bunch of individuals who go out there and try to do like crazy things, and so inevitably there are going to be others who, now that this market has been created, will try to imitate it in some way. And so, the Sadat, who was providing the Syrians, is kind of experimenting in that way. There are UAE officials who are thinking about their own foreign legion. Rwanda does kind of a lot of similar things in Africa in terms of the model of kind of providing troops for mineral resources. And I think overall, this is existing in a context of ever increasing outsourcing and privatization under this second Trump administration. That's clearly the direction that I think they want to go. I'm still kind of, for the same reason that we were talking about earlier, I'm still not sure yet if, like, for some of the top markets for private security, like in Africa, they are interested actually in even funding like American PMCs to be over there, or if they're just like not interested at all. And if they're not interested at all, it becomes difficult for these PMCs to be operating. But I think that it is an increasingly competitive space too, and one that will only grow. What was I going to say? I think, ultimately too, like the supply of guys who will be available for this is probably going to increase as well. If if there is a ceasefire in Ukraine, I mean the you're going to see a lot of guys hovering
Out of work
around.
soldiers.
You're going to see a lot of out of work soldiers who will be looking for something on both sides, who will be looking for things to do. So the Ukrainians, I think, if there's a ceasefire, will very much get involved in this space as well. But I mean, I think sometimes the whole like, is this a threat to the nation state is kind of sometimes overblown, because I don't want to. Our reference point still is very much the nation state, and we still very much operate, even though at the edges it might not really exist, it's still like the referent for us, right? And
the PMC is still the tool of the state rather than the other way around.
It's going
for the most part.
For the most part, they're going to this. They're going to states looking to, like they're like, I think, like the theory of like a. I mean, it happened I think a couple of times in the past, but like the theory of like a PMC going into, like Eastern Congo and just like setting up like the country of Wagner, right? Like that would be, the international system would pretty quickly like seek to destroy that. Because, the paradigm is still.
Yeah. The system deploys red blood cells. Like,
Yeah.
attack
Very,
that.
we like.
Or white blood cells. I should
Yeah.
say.
They don't like, they don't like that. And so I don't think we're at any point where any kind of entity like that is in position to replace the nation state either. But will things be further and further outsourced? Absolutely.
And will it create a world where conflict is just more rife? Like, are we moving back into this sort of medieval system where city-states sponsor mercenary companies and deploy them out against each other? Especially Syria, it seems like a harbinger of that, I think, in some ways. The way these groups came together, like LLCs, conflict to conflict.
I mean, it's an interesting question because, and I think it's important, and we mentioned it earlier, like PMCs are not the source of conflict, right? They're a symptom of conflict.
There are some tangential exceptions where the fear is that they are exacerbating the conflict to keep it going.
Exactly. And so they certainly can exacerbate, right? And they
for
can,
profit-driven reasons.
For profit-driven reasons. I don't think, and like having spent a lot of time in the central, there's also this theory that like, PMCs will like are incentivized to keep a low grade conflict going because that's how they stay hired. But like, I mean, like anyone, you can't maintain anything. Like anyone who like tries to, like anyone, like just try managing like 3 people and you realize that you can't like maintain a low grade conflict at like a perfect. And so like what people attributed to, Wagner like creating, more armed group insurgents because of its methods, they weren't doing that on purpose. It was the result of what they were doing. But like you said, it can really exacerbate like the war economies and a lot of these places. I mean, CAR is one of them. The Sudan border with Chad. I mean, kind of to bear arms is how you live life. That's the political economy, and that might expand to more areas. But how these things are solved is ultimately a question of politics and the equitable distribution of political power and resources from, among the people of the state. It's the only way.
So the book, Death is Our Business, it's out now.
Yes, sir.
People can find it wherever they shop
Wherever
for
fine books are sold. Yeah.
they're out there. Anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to get into? Anything that I missed?
No, I mean, I think we've covered like
Quite a
pretty
bit.
Yeah, we've covered pretty much the story. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah. So guys, go check out the book. Like I said, I read it this week. It's definitely worth your time. And this guy, John, speaks like 8 languages. And this is really, I can say this as a writer and as a researcher, like this is one of the stumbling blocks for any type of book like this is like, I am not bilingual or trilingual or whatever that it is you are. So there's a difficulty in like reaching across these cultural lines. Like I can't talk to Russians in Russian, I can't talk to Afghans in Pashtun. I have this problem. And so you were uniquely positioned, I think, to write this
Thank
book.
you. Thank you.
And I think it comes through.
Uniquely stupid too, in a lot of respects as well.
It required a little bit of that egotism, right?
Yeah.
That I can go into CAR and I can write this book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's okay. A
Yeah.
little bit of ambition is a good thing.
Helps. Yeah.
Okay, questions.
Cool.
What do we got, Dimitri?
From M. Corbin, have they ever used Wagner to pull people east of the Urals for the Russian military?
Have they ever used Wagner to pull people?
He means like in Siberia or Central Asia?
Yeah, to pull people east of the Urals for the Russian military.
Oh, no. I mean, the people within Wagner come from all across Russia. Their recruiting offices were from all across Russia. I'm not sure that there's like a massive geographic distinction in terms of where people are from and fighting on the front, like a distinction between like it's mostly like European Russians or like people from Siberia or what have you.
One more question, Adam. Have you ever read the book written by a Russian ex-Wagner guy who fought in Palmia? It's called The Same River Twice, published in 2022.
Yeah. And I know Marat who wrote that book very well, and Marat also shared his story again. And I cite his book and his story, his books, but also he shared some extra stuff as well for this one.
I got a question. What's the deal with Pavel Prigozhin now?
I don't think so. Pavel Prigozhin is Yevgeny Prigozhin's son. I think there are kind of these like rumors that he's like the head of Wagner now, but I mean, again, if anything, I think the guy's like in a golden cage where the agreement was probably that he can, keep some money and like not like do anything that would be, considered a threat. And so if he does even have a role, I don't think that I think if anything, it would be as like a figurehead, but I've never seen anything to show that he even has like a serious role at the moment.
So
Awesome.
we will see all you guys on Tuesday for our Patreon subscribers. And if you're not subscribed, there's a link down in the description, and you can subscribe for just $5 a month and get access to all of these episodes ad-free. And if you subscribe for $10 a month, we'll send you the patch, the Team House podcast patch. And we'll also have some links down in the description to Death is Our Business. I hope you guys will go and check it out, and we'll see you next week. So take care, everyone out there. Have a nice weekend.
Hey guys, it's Jack. I just want to talk to you for a moment about how you can support the show if you've been watching it, enjoying it, but you'd like to get a little bit more involved and help us continue to do this. You can check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/theteamhouse. And for $5 a month, you can get access to all of these episodes of The Team House ad-free. The same goes with our affiliated podcast, Eyes On, with Andy Milburn, Jason Lyons, Mick Mulroy. That one, you will also get all of those episodes ad-free. And you support the channel and the show, and we really appreciate it. The Patreon members are literally what has helped this company, this small business survive, especially during our early years. And you are what continues to help this thing going, even as we navigate the turbulent world of YouTube advertising. So we really appreciate all of you guys. There's going to be a link down in the description to that Patreon page. And there is also going to be a link to our new merch shop. So if you guys want to go and get some Team House merchandise, we got stickers and we also have patches. And I should mention, if you sign up for Patreon at $10 a month, we will mail you this patch as well. So we really appreciate that. But they're also for sale on the merch shop. And additionally, they got t-shirts up there, water bottles, a tote bag, coffee mugs, all that good stuff. So please go and check them out and support the show. We really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.